On the day I turned 63, I walked into my home thinking I was about to celebrate a quiet birthday with the people I loved most. My husband stood by the fireplace. My daughter-in-law smiled too sweetly. And then, instead of a cake or candles, I was handed divorce papers. Right there in front of the family I had spent my whole life building, he told me he was leaving me. Not just for anyone. For her, the woman I had welcomed like a daughter. In that moment, I realized I hadn't just been replaced. I had been erased. Stay with me till the very end and let me know where you're watching from so I can see how far the truth really spreads. When I turned 63, I thought my life, though quieter than it used to be, still had a place for joy. That morning, I brewed my usual tea, fed the cat, and watered the hydrangeas on the porch like I always did. There were no calls from David or Marcus, which stung a little, but I brushed it off, telling myself they were planning something. Later that evening, I pulled into the driveway and saw unfamiliar cars parked out front. I felt a flutter of warmth, thinking maybe, just maybe, they had remembered. I walked into my home, the one I had cleaned, decorated, and cared for nearly 4 decades, and saw pink and gold balloons, my best china on the table, and streamers hanging from the chandelier I picked out when Marcus was 10. People clapped and smiled, but something in their eyes froze me. The room felt cold, too staged, too quiet, like I was walking into a scene I didn't belong in. Ivy, my daughter-in-law, walked up with arms wide, looking like she had just stepped out of a magazine. She kissed my cheek and told me it was a party just for me. I smiled, though my stomach already knew better. Marcus wasn't there. I asked, and Ivy said he was away on business, that he sent his love. She said it as if it were a formality, not a message from a son who'd never missed my birthday in 30 years. I looked around at the guests. Some were family, some neighbors, but all of them avoided eye contact, and no one truly smiled. David stood by the fireplace, hands in his pockets, face blank. I thought he'd give a toast. Instead, Ivy pulled out a manila envelope and set it in front of me like it was a birthday card. I opened it slowly. My name. My marriage. Legal phrases. Dissolution. Division of assets. Divorce. David placed a hand on Ivy's shoulder. I stared at them, frozen. Then he said the words that shattered whatever illusion I had left. He was marrying Ivy, my son's wife, the woman I had welcomed into my family, into my home, into my heart. No one spoke. I heard only the ticking of the clock and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Janet, my sister, had tears in her eyes. Our neighbor, Mrs. Green, stared down at her wineglass like it might swallow her whole. No one defended me. No one moved. I looked at Ivy clinging to David like she'd won a prize, and I realized something painful and undeniable. They had planned this, chosen this moment. My birthday, my house, my people. This was never a celebration. It was an execution. Still, I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I picked up my purse, looked Ivy straight in the eye, and told her I hoped the cake tasted as sweet as she imagined. I said it calmly. Not for them. For me. Because if I let them see me break, they'd think they had won. I walked out of the house I had built with my bare hands and all my love. I left behind my wedding photos, my memories, my son's baby blanket in the attic. I left behind the life I thought I knew. But I also took something with me that night. Something they didn't expect. I took the last spark of my dignity. And I made a silent promise to myself. If they wanted war, they'd chosen the wrong woman to betray. Looking back, I realized the signs were always there. They weren't loud or obvious, but they whispered around the edges of my everyday life. I just didn't want to hear them. David started coming home later first, once or twice a week, than nearly every night. He always had a reason, always said he was tired, and I believed him because I wanted to. I made his favorite dinners, left them warm on the stove, and waited up far too long for a man who had already checked out of our marriage. Ivy used to call me Mom. She brought me flowers on Mother's Day and sent sweet texts just because. Then, somewhere along the line, she started showing up at the house when David was home, but Marcus wasn't. I assumed she needed help with something, maybe just enjoyed having someone to talk to, but now I see how naive that sounds. There were moments that should have struck me as strange. The way Ivy would laugh at David's jokes like he was the most fascinating man in the room. The way she touched his arm when she spoke, lingering longer than a daughter-in-law should. I noticed once that her perfume smelled just like the one I used to wear, but I brushed it off. Thought maybe she admired my taste. Marcus once told me I should travel more. He said I'd spent my whole life taking care of others, and it was time I did something for myself. At the time, I took it as a compliment. But now I wonder if he was gently nudging me away from the center of my own family. There were changes in the house, too. Small ones. A chair moved from its usual spot. A wine glass left on the counter that I didn't remember using. I asked David once if he had company while I was visiting my sister. He smiled, said Ivy had stopped by to ask about a surprise for Marcus. I wanted to believe it. Ivy started calling me less. When I reached out, she was always busy. She stopped inviting me to join them for dinner, said they needed more couple time. I assumed it was normal for newlyweds to want space. I gave it to them. David grew distant. Not in a cruel way, but in a quiet, methodical unraveling. He stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing when I got my hair trimmed or when I was up coughing all night. I told myself we were just getting older, that all marriages settle eventually. I didn't know he had already replaced me in his heart. I remember one afternoon catching them talking in the kitchen. They weren't doing anything inappropriate, just standing close and speaking in low tones. But when I entered, they stepped apart like teenagers caught misbehaving. Ivy smiled too brightly. David suddenly remembered a phone call he had to make. I stood there holding a plate of cookies I'd baked for Marcus. I told myself it was nothing. I kept telling myself it was nothing. I clung to the idea that if I was loyal, if I stayed kind, everything would settle. We'd been married nearly 40 years. We'd raised a child. Survived job losses, illnesses, grief. How could I believe something so dark was blooming inside my own home? But it was. And I see it now in excruciating detail. Every ignored instinct, every swallowed doubt, every little moment when I could have asked harder questions but didn't. Not because I was stupid, not because I was weak, but because I believed in them, in my husband, in my family, and I never imagined they would be the ones to break me. I see it all now, and I wish I didn't. I told myself I was just going back to pick up a few things. Toothbrush, medications, my winter coat that I kept in the front closet. I thought I'd be in and out in 5 minutes, maybe 10. I wasn't ready for what I'd find. The second I opened the front door, I smelled it. Jasmine and sandalwood. The perfume I'd worn for 20 years, the one David used to buy me every Christmas without fail. For a moment, I thought it was lingering on the curtains or still in the air from when I last lived there. But it wasn't memory. It was fresh. It was hers. I stepped inside, and the first thing I saw was the rug. It wasn't mine. The warm, rust-colored one I'd chosen from the market in a cheval was gone. In its place was something sleek, cold, expensive-looking. My wooden coffee table had been swapped out for glass and chrome. The throw pillows I embroidered by hand were nowhere to be seen. It was my house, but it felt like walking into a stranger's model home. I heard footsteps from upstairs and turned toward the staircase. Ivy appeared at the landing wearing my robe. Not just any robe. The ivory one David had given me for our 25th anniversary. I stood there staring at her, willing myself to breathe. She didn't flinch. She smiled wide and slow, like she was waiting for me to compliment how it fit. I asked her why she was wearing my things. She said it so casually. That David told her to make herself at home. That it was just a robe. That I shouldn't be so sensitive. She walked down the stairs like she owned the place. Her hand trailed the railing I had refinished one summer when Marcus was still in college. She moved past me and into the kitchen, and I followed numb. The table was bare. No fruit bowl. No placemats. No small chipped teacup I used for loose change. It was spotless, sterile, like I had never lived there. Ivy pulled a box from behind the island and told me it had some of my things. She said they'd ship the rest to whatever address I gave them. Her voice was syrupy polite, like she was doing me a favor. I looked down and saw what she'd packed: 3 sweaters, 2 photo frames, and an old pair of slippers. Not even the good ones. I opened a drawer to check if my journals were there. Gone. I peeked into the hallway closet. My coat was missing. I asked about it. She shrugged and said it might be in the donation pile. Every step I took through that house felt like being erased. My paintings were off the walls. The quilt I made for Marcus when he was born wasn't on the shelf where I kept it. Even the smell of lavender I always used in the laundry had been replaced by something sharp and citrusy. Ivy walked over and placed her hand on my shoulder like we were girlfriends. She leaned in close and told me this was the natural course of things. That it was better for everyone if I moved on peacefully. That clinging to the past only made it harder. I wanted to scream. I wanted to rip the robe off her body and throw every glass decoration she'd brought into my kitchen. But I didn't. I stood still. Because if I let her see me unravel, she'd win twice. She asked if I wanted tea. Like nothing was wrong. I said no, picked up the box, and walked toward the door. But just before I left, I turned back one last time. The woman standing in my kitchen was smiling. Wearing my clothes. Breathing my air. Living the life I spent 4 decades building. And David let her. That was the part I couldn't swallow. Not just that he chose her, but that he let her wipe me out like I was dust on a shelf. Like I never mattered. Like I was just the warm-up act for his real life to begin. I closed the door behind me without saying a word. I didn't cry until I reached the car. And even then, I didn't wipe the tears away. I wanted to feel every single one. Because the woman they tried to erase still felt, still remembered, and she wasn't going to disappear quietly. I wasn't planning to go back inside the study. But something about that room pulled at me like a whisper I couldn't quite make out. I opened the door slowly, half expecting everything to look different, but it hadn't changed much. Same old bookshelf, same faint scent of cedar and old paper. The desk drawer stuck a little when I pulled it. David always said it was the wood swelling. I yanked harder, and that's when I saw it. A worn blue folder jammed into the very back, tucked beneath a pile of old receipts and envelopes. It didn't belong to anything I remembered organizing. I slid it out, hands trembling just enough to make the paper flap in the air. The first page was a photograph. Ivy. Except she didn't look like Ivy. Her hair was darker, shorter, her clothes flashier. She was laughing with a man who looked old enough to be her father. Behind that, more photos. Different men. Different versions of her. Each image told a story I couldn't quite piece together, but the pattern was loud and clear. There were aliases, too. Ava Petrova, Claire Morgan, Emily Reeves. I ran my fingers along the names, feeling each one like a slap across the face. Ivy wasn't just pretending with me. She had done this before. She was someone else entirely layered in masks, each one stitched with a lie. I kept flipping through. Receipts from hotels in Florida, Las Vegas, New Jersey. One from a luxury car rental service signed under a name I'd never heard but recognized from one of the photos. One picture stopped me cold. It was Ivy or Ava or whoever she truly was smiling into the camera with David beside her long before they ever told me the truth. My chest tightened. I had spent nights wondering what I did wrong. And all along the wrong was never mine to carry. I sat down slowly on the edge of the desk chair and held the folder in my lap like a fragile secret. My hands were still now. My heart was not. It would have been easy to let anger take over, to storm out and throw the pictures in their smug, deceitful faces. But I didn't. I breathed, in and out. Then I picked up my phone. I remembered the name on one of the back pages. Davidson, private investigator. There was a number. I stared at it for a long moment before dialing, not even sure he would answer. But when he did, I introduced myself, told him I'd found something in my house that didn't belong, and that I had some questions. He paused, then asked if I was Claire. When I said yes, he let out a breath and said he'd been waiting for this call. That was the moment I knew something even deeper had been hidden from me. Something darker than betrayal. This wasn't just about a cheating husband or a manipulative daughter-in-law. It was a game I'd never agreed to play. But now I was in it. And I wasn't walking away. The office was small and dim, tucked behind a row of shuttered businesses on a street I hadn't walked in years. The blinds were drawn, the air smelled faintly of old carpet and burnt coffee, and the name Davidson Investigations was stenciled on the glass door in chipped black paint. I sat across from him, heart pounding like I was waiting to be sentenced. Davidson was older than I expected, with silver hair and tired eyes that had seen too much. He didn't ask many questions. He just looked at me, then opened a drawer and pulled out a file thicker than the one I'd found. He handed it over slowly, almost gently, like he knew what it would do to me. I flipped through pages of documents, photos, flight records, and aliases. She had at least 6 confirmed names, and every one of them tied to a man over 50, most of whom had filed police reports or gone bankrupt shortly after meeting her. Ivy, or Ava Petrova, was a ghost built from lies, charming her way into Holmes' accounts' hearts. Then she vanished, always richer. Always untouched. I stared at one of the photos. Ava with a man I didn't recognize kissing his cheek as he signed a paper. The expression on his face was peaceful, trusting. I wondered if that's what I looked like just months ago. I felt sick. Davidson sat forward, elbows on the desk, and said something that made the room spin. David hired him first. Nearly a year ago. He was the one who suspected Ava wasn't who she claimed to be. He paid good money to track her movements, verify her history, gather everything I was now holding in my hands. And yet he married her anyway. I couldn't speak. I just stared down at the file, my hands stiff and cold. Davidson said he didn't understand it either. That when he gave David the report, David went quiet, asked for no follow-up, and paid the remaining balance in full. Then he stopped returning calls. I tried to find logic in it, tried to make it make sense. But all I kept thinking was that the man I had loved for nearly 40 years had seen the truth. He knew, and still he let her destroy me. He could have warned me. He could have stopped it. He could have chosen me. Davidson said he felt sorry for me. I could tell he meant it. But his sympathy was a weight I didn't want. I didn't need pity. I needed strength. Because the man who vowed to protect me had handed me over to a predator and smiled while doing it. I left the office with the file clutched tightly to my chest. The wind outside was sharp, the sun too bright. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just walked every step heavier than the last, trying to wrap my mind around the second betrayal. The first had hurt, but this one broke something deeper. Trust is a fragile thing. I had built my life on it. And now, piece by piece, it was slipping through my fingers like ash. The day after I left Davidson's office, I drove straight to the bank. My name was still on everything. David hadn't bothered to change a thing. Maybe he thought I'd crumble and go quietly. Maybe he forgot who I was before I became a wife and a mother. I closed our joint savings account first, transferred every last cent to a new one under my name alone. Then I moved on to the retirement funds, the emergency accounts, even the safety deposit box I hadn't opened in years. I left just enough behind to keep him unaware for now. I wanted time. A few days, maybe a week before the alarms went off. Next, I visited a lawyer. Not the one who handled our will. A new one. Young, sharp, direct. I asked her to draw up a living trust to shield what was mine, what was left. I listed Marcus as the sole beneficiary. Not because I was ready to forgive him, but because Ava would never touch what belonged to my blood. At night, I stayed in a small motel by the interstate. The sheets were stiff and the air conditioner rattled, but it was quiet. Safe. No one knew I was there. I kept the folder Davidson gave me tucked under the pillow like a weapon I hadn't drawn yet. I slept with one eye open, not out of fear, but resolve. Something inside me had hardened. A few days later, the first message came. No name. Just a photo of me leaving the bank. Then another. Me sitting alone at a diner. Then one more, this time with a short note. Accidents happen. Be careful, Claire. I didn't flinch. I saved the messages, logged the times, forwarded everything to Davidson. He told me not to respond, not to provoke her. But I wasn't afraid. Ava could stalk, threaten, sneak around corners all she wanted. She had already taken my house, my name, my peace. What else was there? She called once. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail in that same sweet, polished tone she used to use at family dinners. Said she was worried about me. That it'd be a shame if something happened while I was out late alone. I played the message twice, then deleted it. I knew what she was doing. She wanted me to shake. To fold. But I'd folded enough for one lifetime. I went back to the house one last time. Not to fight. Just to stand outside and look at what used to be mine. I saw her through the window laughing into her phone, barefoot in my kitchen. She looked relaxed. Smug. Like someone who believed she had won. I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I knew something she didn't. She thought I was broken. That I'd disappear. But the truth was, I had already started taking her power piece by piece like she did to me. Only difference was I was doing it quietly. Patiently. This wasn't revenge. It was preservation. I wasn't trying to ruin her. I was making sure she couldn't ruin me any further. And somewhere deep inside, I hoped she kept watching. Because the woman she tried to erase had just come back. Not softer. Sharper. And ready. The call came just after midnight. Marcus's voice was tight-clipped, barely holding together. He said Ava had been attacked. That she was in the hospital. That the police were asking questions. I sat there on the motel bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to my son speak like a stranger. He said the doctors thought she'd be okay, but the bruises were bad. She told them someone had been following her for days. That she'd reported it. That she feared for her life. I knew where this was going. Even before he said it. He asked if I had anything to do with it. If I'd hired someone. if I had let things go too far. The silence after his words was worse than yelling. It was the kind of silence that sits heavy in the bones. I told him no, that I would never hurt anyone, that he knew me. He didn't answer right away. When he did, it shattered something in me. He said he didn't know what to believe anymore, that ever since David left, I'd changed, that I seemed angry, obsessed, like I couldn't move on. I wanted to scream, to shake him by the shoulders and tell him everything. Show him the photos, the names, the reports, but he wouldn't hear me. He was already gone, wrapped in her story, her tears, her lies. He said he loved me, but that I needed to stop interfering, that Ava was his wife, his family, that I was making things worse. He ended the call without waiting for me to respond. I sat in the dark phone, still pressed to my ear, long after the line had gone quiet. I didn't cry right away. I couldn't. It was too deep, too wide, the kind of pain that doesn't come out through tears, but through silence. She had taken my husband, my home, my place in the world, and now she had taken my son. Not with violence, not with force, but with the slow, deliberate poison of manipulation. And the worst part was he let her. Marcus had always been mine, my boy with the scraped knees and big dreams, the one who used to run to me when life got too hard. And now he looked at me like a threat, like I was the one tearing us apart. I wanted to believe he'd come around, that one day he'd see it all clearly. But in that moment, I felt something inside me give way. A quiet crack I couldn't glue back together. I curled up under the motel blanket and stared at the wall. I wasn't angry at him. I couldn't be. I was just empty. There's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream. It just sits in your chest like stone, making it hard to breathe. That night, I didn't sleep. I listened to the traffic outside, the hum of the ice machine down the hall, and the sound of my own heart still beating even when everything else felt gone. I had lost my husband to betrayal, my home to a stranger, and now my son to a lie. All that was left was me, and I didn't even know who that was anymore. It was mid-morning when Davidson called. His voice was steady, but there was something in it that made my stomach twist. He told me Ava had never been attacked. The whole thing was staged. What's more, the FBI had been looking for her for months. She was part of a fraud ring targeting cancer foundations, had raised hundreds of thousands in fake donations, had disappeared from at least 3 states under different names. Davidson said the agency had been tracking her movements, quietly building a case. They had just gotten confirmation she was hiding under the name Ivy Reynolds. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, heart pounding, trying to take it in. She wasn't just a liar or a homewrecker. She was a criminal, a professional con artist. And Marcus was wrapped in the middle of it, blind to all of it, standing in the crosshairs without even knowing. Davidson told me the FBI wanted my help. They needed someone close to confirm the connection, someone who had physical evidence, someone who could point to the woman in that hospital bed and say, yes, that's her. I didn't speak for a long time. My eyes stared at the motel wall, but I wasn't really seeing it. I kept thinking of Marcus, of his voice on the phone, cold and distant, of how he looked at me now like I was the one destroying everything. If I said yes, if I helped them take her in, he would hate me forever. He would never forgive me. But if I stayed silent, I'd be letting her keep him, letting her poison him even more, letting her drag him down with her and call it love. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like a wound being reopened. I had already lost him. But if I chose silence now, I'd be losing myself too. So I said yes. The next day, they arrested her in the hospital. Quietly. No sirens. No shouting. Just two agents and a signature on a form. I watched from down the hall as they escorted her out. She looked right at me. For a second, her face didn't change. Then it twisted. Not in fear. In rage. I didn't flinch. I didn't speak. I just stood there, hands clenched, feeling everything and nothing all at once. Later, Marcus called. He was furious. Said I had betrayed him. Said I had destroyed the one good thing left in his life. I didn't try to explain. I just listened, taking in every word like sharp glass. He hung up without waiting for a reply. I sat on the edge of the bed that night, hands shaking, heartbroken all over again. But I didn't regret it, because for once I had done the right thing. Not the easy thing. Not the thing that would bring me comfort, but the thing that might one day save him. I chose the truth, even though it cost me everything. Even though it left me alone. I did it because I loved him. Because love is not blind. It sees clearly and still chooses what is right. The sun poured through the kitchen window like a soft blanket. The new apartment was small, but everything in it was mine. The pale yellow curtains, the second-hand armchair, the row of potted herbs growing unevenly along the sill. It was quiet here, peaceful, a kind of silence that didn't hurt. I was making tea when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number right away, but I answered anyway. It was Marcus. His voice cracked before he said my name. He apologized. Slowly, carefully, like each word was a step on broken glass. He said he knew the truth now, that the FBI had confirmed everything, that he had been wrong, and he was sorry. I didn't cry. I thought I might, but I didn't. I just listened, letting his words fill the spaces that had ached for so long. He said he understood if I couldn't forgive him, that he wouldn't blame me. I told him I loved him. I always had. That didn't need forgiveness. It just needed time. We talked for almost an hour. Not about Ava or David, just about him. About his work. About a recipe I used to make. It felt like brushing dust off something I hadn't touched in years and finding it still whole underneath. David reached out a few weeks later. A letter. I didn't read it. I tucked it into a drawer with the rest of the things I no longer needed. There was nothing there for me anymore. Not anger. Not longing. Just a clean, quiet nothing. I spent my mornings walking the trail near the lake. I learned to cook for one to sleep without waiting for someone beside me. I planted flowers on the balcony. Some grew crooked. Some never bloomed. But they were mine. Like the rest of this life, I had rebuilt with bare hands and tired hope. People say starting over is hard. But the truth is staying in a place where you're unloved is harder. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't chasing explanations. I wasn't trying to fix what others had broken. I was just living. Slowly. Gently. On my own terms. And that was enough. If you were me, would you have chosen the truth? Would you risk losing your only child just to make sure the right thing was done? Or would you have stayed silent, holding on to what little you had left, hoping love could fix what truth might break? I think about that question more than I'd like to admit. And maybe there's no right answer. But I chose the truth because I wanted my son to have something real, even if it wasn't me. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a moment where doing the right thing meant losing someone you loved? Tell me your story. Because sometimes just knowing we're not alone makes all the difference.